morning, guys. Happy Tuesday. Sorry that I was late yesterday with putting up the thing. I literally forgot that I had. It's complicated. Anyway, I'm sorry, and I'm back to normal today. So we've started book number 31 in my series, although if you have the new books, it's like book 3 or something. Summer of the Sea Serpent. So we're going on our 3rd Merlin mission this week. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to do vocabulary, review what happened yesterday, and then Archie's very excited about this. And then we'll kind of go from there. Okay, so the first word is cove. And a cove is basically like where, it's a little bit of where water kind of comes inward and is like surrounded by mountains or land in an ocean. The next word is dappled. And dappled means the way that light comes through something else. So when light goes through trees or goes through clouds or whatever, and it doesn't come in like straight shining down, it's like little bits of light kind of. The next word is grasp. Grasp just means to hold or to grab. The next word is mighty. Mighty means to be strong or to be, to be bold. Murky. Murky means cloudy and not clear. Receded means to pull back. So we think about receding as being like with waves. When waves go up on the beach and then pull back, that's receding. And then solstice is basically that time of year and the midway point between the hotter times of the year and the colder times. It's the days when we have both the longest and shortest day of the year. So the solstice in between spring and summer is in June, and that's the longest day of the year. It's when we have the most daylight. And then the solstice in the winter is typically in December, and that's when we have the shortest day of the year, which is between fall and winter, technically. So, and the solstice used to be celebrated as a holiday by a lot of people a long time ago. So, yesterday Jack and Annie went on a journey, and they, on this mission, their goal is to find a sword. The Sword of Light, and they're a little bit concerned because there's quite a bit that they have to do before sunsets, and they have left at noon. So I'm going to reread the rhyme to you so you can kind of remember what the rhyme was, and we'll go from there. So the rhyme said, he's really excited today. Before night falls on a long summer day, a shining sword must find its way into your hands and out of the gloom, or Camelot's king shall meet his doom. To begin your quest for the Sword of Light, call for the help of the Water Knight. Then pass through the cave of the Spider Queen, and swim with the Selkie clothed in green. Enter the cove of the stormy coast, dive neath the cloak of the old grey ghost. Answer a question with love, not fear, with rhyme and sword your home is near. So they made their wish and went to the location where this thing took place. And they were able to meet the Water Knight. And if you remember, the Water Knight rode a horse that was half horse and half fish. And it took them across the cove. And then we had left off with Chapter 3, The Cave of the Spider Queen. So they started their journey, but they haven't gotten very far yet. Okay, so Chapter 3, Cave of the Spider Queen. Gentle waves rippled through the cove, and Jack and Annie swam to the foot of the cliff. They pulled themselves onto the boulders. Soaking wet, they sat for a moment in the warm sunlight to catch their breath. That was cool, said Annie. Yeah, but why? Jack gasped. Why dump us way out here? What do we do now? Well, check the rhyme, said Annie. What happens after we call for the help of the Water Knight? Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out the seashell. He read, call for the help of the Water Knight, then pass through the cave of the Spider Queen. Oh, right, said Annie, and she took a deep breath. Spider Queen. Sorry, said Jack, but don't worry. Maybe the Spider Queen is a person. It could just be your nickname. Yeah, but what if she's half a person, half a spider, said Annie, like the Raven King was half man, half raven? Jack shuddered at the memory of the monster of their last Merlin mission. Well, don't think about that, he said. Time's running out. Let's just find this cave. Annie nodded and smiled bravely. Okay, she said. You're right. They stood up and started climbing barefoot around the craggy curves at the base of the cliff. Craggy is like when rocks are like all rough and stuff. As they rounded a corner, they both gasped. In front of them was the mouth of a cave. The mouth was covered with thick, sticky white ropes. The ropes were woven together in a crisscross cobweb pattern. If that's a spider web, we're in big trouble, said Annie. Jack tried to sound calm. The size of the web doesn't actually tell us the size of the spider, he said. Plus, I once read that no spider on Earth is bigger than a dinner plate. Well, yeah, but no horse on Earth has a giant fishtail either, said Annie. Good point, thought Jack. Let's just concentrate on finding the Sword of Light before night, he said. Jack picked up a stone the size of a softball. He hurled it toward the mouth of the cave. The stone sailed through the giant cobweb and into the cave, pulling the sticky rope strands down with it. Jack turned to Annie. Are you ready? She didn't move. Jack took her hand. Don't worry, I won't let any monster spiders get you, he said. He nodded toward the mouth of the cave. Onward? Onward, Annie said in a small voice. Then she and Jack stepped over the fallen web and entered the cave of the Spider Queen. Inside the cave, the walls were black and shiny. The ground was wet and slippery under their bare feet. Yike, Annie said, jumping back. A pale pink crab scuttled sideways across the rocky floor. Don't be afraid, said Jack. It's not a spider. I know, said Annie. Sorry. As they went deeper into the cave, it grew darker and darker. Finally, Jack saw a faint light coming from a wide arched passageway. That way, he said. So there's the entrance. They stepped through an arch into a round chamber with a high ceiling. There were several large cracks in the ceiling that let in beams of sunlight. The misty light shined on the mossy green ledges and on a green, spongy-looking floor. Silver droplets dripped from above, kerplopping into tiny pools. Squeaks and chirps came from crannies and hiding places in the wall. What's that noise? Asked Annie. Probably just teeny cave crickets or baby bats, said Jack. No. That noise, said Annie. The whispering noise. Jack listened. Then he heard it. A low whispering. He couldn't make out the words. It kind of just sounded like whisper, whisper, whisper. The hair stood up on the back of his neck. Now he began to feel scared. This place is really creepy, said Annie. Yeah, no kidding, said Jack, but we don't have to stay here long. The rhyme says we just pass through the cave, so let's hurry and pass through it. They walked through the ghostly green light of the chamber. The spongy feet squished beneath their bare feet. As they searched for an exit from the cave, they both kept an eye out for the Spider Queen. Hey, there's a starfish, said Annie. She pointed to a bright orange starfish that was clinging to the rocky ceiling. How'd the starfish get up there? Before Jack could answer, a wave crashed into the chamber. Water splashed over Jack and Annie. Yikes, said Annie, and they jumped back onto the mossy ledge jutting out from the wall. The wave washed out. There was a moment of quiet, and then another wave surged into the chamber. It splashed up against the cave wall, soaking Jack and Annie. Oh man, said Jack. The tide must be coming in. I bet this whole cave is going to be flooded. The wave receded, and for a moment, all was quiet. We better leave now, said Jack. Quick, go back the way we came. Jack and Annie jumped down from the ledge. Before they could escape, another wave crashed into the cave. This one swept them off their feet and pulled them into the foamy water. Jack grabbed Annie's hand. Fighting the current, they climbed back onto the mossy ledge. The water churned and gurgled around the chamber. We can't go back the way we came, said Jack. The waves are just going to keep knocking us down, and we'll get caught up in the current. Maybe we can get out through the crack, said Annie. She pointed to the widest crack in the cave ceiling above them. It was high above the swirling water. It's too high, said Jack. There's no way we can get up there. He looked frantically around the flooded cave, searching for another way out. Suddenly, he froze in horror. Clinging to a ledge near the ceiling crack was the Spider Queen. She had 8 red, glowing eyes. She had 8 long, hairy legs. And she was much bigger than a dinner plate. The Spider Queen was bigger than Jack. Chapter 4, Web Walk. Jack grabbed Annie's hand. Okay, whatever you do, don't look up, he said. Annie looked up. Ah! She screamed. She started to leap off the ledge into the churning water, but another wave crashed wildly against the wall. Jack held Annie back. Don't jump, he said. You'll drown. Above the sound of the rushing water, a loud whisper echoed. Stay, stay, stay. The Spider Queen was staring at them with her 8 red eyes. As Jack and Annie watched in horror, the giant spider shot a web strand thick as a rope straight at them. Jack and Annie ducked. The strand stuck to the wall. What is she doing? Cried Annie. I don't know, said Jack. They looked back up at the Spider Queen. She'd crawled a few feet closer to the crack in the wall. She stared down at them for a moment with glowing red eyes, then shot out another thick rope strand. Watch out, shouted Jack. He and Annie ducked. Thwack! A second web stuck to the first ledge, just a few feet away from the first. Oh no, look, cried Annie. She pointed to the cave ceiling. The monstrous spider was zigzagging between the strands of her web and heading straight towards them. Jack and Annie screamed and pressed themselves against the wall. "We have to leave," cried Annie, but before they could even make a move, another wave crashed into the cave. The water swirled with ferocious force around the chamber. "We can't leave," cried Jack. "Well, we can't stay," cried Annie. "Wait, wait, wait," the Spider Queen whispered. The giant spider kept zigzagging between the two lines, spinning more and more web and coming closer to Jack and Annie. They watched in horror, unable to speak and move. But just when she came close enough to touch them, the Spider Queen turned around and scurried back up to the ceiling, leaving behind a giant web ladder. The Spider Queen stared at Jack and Annie with her eyes. "Climb, climb, climb," she whispered from her spot on the ceiling. "I think she might be trying to help us," said Jack. "No," said Annie, "she's trying to trap us." The spider whispered again. "Climb, climb, climb." Something about her voice made Jack feel certain the Spider Queen was trying to help. "She doesn't want to hurt us," he said. "She wants to help us escape. Besides, we don't have a choice." The water was rising higher and higher. It was swirling above their ankles. "We've got to climb," said Jack. "I'll go first." He reached up and grabbed one of the spider ropes. It was damp and sticky. He pulled himself onto the bottom strand. "Grab on," he shouted to Annie. "We have to get to that crack in the ceiling." Annie grabbed one of the web ropes. "Ew," she said. "It's gross." "Hold on," said Jack. Holding tightly to the sticky strands, Jack and Annie began making their way up the Spider Queen's web ladder. The web swayed and stretched, but it was sturdy enough to hold their weight. Its stickiness even kept them from slipping and falling. Climbing and climbing, they moved higher and higher. As they drew near the crack in the ceiling, Jack kept his eyes on the Spider Queen. She was watching them carefully. Finally, Jack reached the ceiling crack. He swung to one side of the web ladder, putting himself between Annie and the giant spider. "You go first," he said. "Okay," said Annie. She grabbed the rocky ledge of the opening and stuck her head out. "There's nowhere to go but into the water," she called. "How far down?" said Jack. "Pretty far," said Annie, "but we can make it." "Wait," said Jack. But Annie already squeezed herself through the crack. "Annie, be careful," said Jack. Splash. "Oh, man," said Jack. So there's the Spider Queen. Then he glanced back at the Spider Queen. Her glowing red eyes seemed to peer at him out of the shadows. "Go, go, go," she whispered. Jack smiled. "Thanks," he said. "Go," the Spider Queen whispered again. Jack pulled himself out of the darkness and onto the rocky water and onto the narrow rocky ledge. The bright sun sparkled on the blue water. "Come on," Annie shouted. She was already bobbing up and down in the waves. Jack took off his glasses, pinched his nose, and closed his eyes. Then he jumped off into the water. Chapter 5. Bah! Bah! And that's where we're going to stop for today. So, how many of you were surprised by this Spider Queen? How many of you thought she was going to end up being evil or scary and she ended up actually being kind of nice? Leave me a message in the comments below. Okay, see you guys tomorrow on Wednesday.